Good morning, everyone. Good Tevach, Shua Tov. Perek Tes Mishna Daled. Gedulei Truma True. Okay, quick. We have to start with an introduction. On a Torah level, if something forbidden is planted, what grows from it is permitted, and the new growth is not considered an extension of the prohibited item. This is sure. Okay, that's something we've been discussing until now. Our discussion has specifically been about truma. If you plant truma seeds, what's the status of what grows afterwards? So, from the Torah's point, something forbidden, like truma that's forbidden to non-Kohanim, if it's planted, what grows from it is not an extension and should be regular grain. This is surely true for the great majority of species whose planted seed decays with an entirely new plant growing up in its place. Moreover, it is true even for species such as the onion, whose seed, which is a planted bulb, does not decay but expands and gives rise to new bulbs around it. Although the original forbidden bulb remains, the new growth that comes out of it is still viewed as an independent entity, which is therefore not subject to the prohibition of the parent plant. Accordingly, on a biblical level, the produce generated by planting a forbidden item is permitted. So we're going to see that there are differences whether we're talking about a seed that decays or a seed like a bulb does not decay. But as a rule, or at least as a general rule, at least on a Torah level, anything that grows from something forbidden is permissible. However, the rabbis, however, saw fit to prohibit some of these growths. In certain cases, they prohibited certain growths that what grows from them are forbidden. In some cases, they said it's not forbidden. Okay? The coming Mishna that we're going to do delineates the rabbinical status of the growth of various types of forbidden produce. The coming Mishna speaks specifically of species whose seed decomposes when planted. The more stringent rules for species whose seed does not decompose are discussed later on. So the point is something that we've been mentioning until now. Minat Torah, according to Torah law, you plant something forbidden, what grows out of it is not forbidden. The Rabbanan, the sages, were stringent in certain circumstances. Our Mishnah is going to be discussing examples of when they were strict, when they were stringent, when they did enact that what grows is forbidden, when they didn't enact what grows is forbidden. And most of the cases that we're going to be having in our Mishnah until later on are cases where the seed decomposes. If they don't decompose, like an onion, then there'll be a different discussion later on. So the Mishnah reads, Gedulei Truma Truma. That which grows from truma has a status of truma, as we have been learning until now. The reason why the Rabbanan, the sages, enacted that what grows from truma is truma is because they were concerned that being on a Torah level, what grows is forbidden. So if a Kohen lands up, let's say, with truma that was impure, which he cannot eat, so he'll say to himself, I got a great idea. I'll plant it. And by planting it, it grows afterwards, won't be truma, it won't be tamei, and I'll be good. So it sounds like a good idea, but the sages were concerned that if he's going to do that, that means he's going to leave the truma tameya around until planting season. And the sages were concerned that he or someone else from his household may come to eat it because they're going to think it's truma. And since it's impure truma tameya, they're not allowed. And therefore the sages enacted, if anyone plants truma, what grows is going to have the status of truma. Now, once it has the status of truma, then the Kohen has no incentive to plant his truma tameya, because let's say what grows is truma, and it's not tameya. It's not. We wouldn't say that it's tamei, which is true. The halacha is if you plant truma tameya, what grows from it is truma. It's just not, but it's not tamei. It'll be truma, but not truma tameya. Okay. So in essence, if a Kohen plants a truma tameya and at least it comes out truma tahira, he has what to gain, but not really. He doesn't have really what to gain if all he can produce is truma from this truma tameya. As we said before, truma doesn't go for much money since it's limited to who can eat it. And therefore, for him to leave truma tameya around in order to basically use his planting season to produce more truma, which again, for himself, he may have plenty of other truma. To sell it, he's not going to gain much. And therefore, once we decree once we decree that the grain that grows from truma is truma, he has no more incentive to hold on to it because he's not going to be able to do much with it. That's why the sages enacted that the truma what grows from truma is truma. Okay. Now, let's move on. The Mishnah continues. So gedulei truma, what grows from truma is truma. The gedulei gedulin chulin, but what grows from the growth of truma is chulin. That means you started off with regular truma. You planted it. The Chachamim said what grows is truma. If that which grew and the Chachamim considered truma, you planted it, what would grow from that is chulin. The Chachamim did not extend their decree that far. Next, aval hatevel u'ma'aser rishon. Okay, something important here to mention, something we mentioned before, and that is in the case of the growth of truma being chulin, the Yerushalmi says that is only by species where the seed decomposes when planted. If we're talking about where the seed does not decompose, like by an onion, so then what grows from the growth of truma will be considered truma. Okay, so it grows to the mitzvot is considered truma, and there may be cases where even in that case of the bulb, it wouldn't be considered truma. Next, aval hatevel u'ma'aser rishon. Now we have a number of examples where we say that the growth of these things are chulin. They are not considered truma. Aval hatevel, the first example, tevel, that means you have grain that you were supposed to separate trumas and ma'aser from. You're not allowed to eat it, and you planted it. Are you allowed to plant tevel? No, you're not allowed to plant tevel. But the Mishna is saying, and it's telling us, but if you do plant tevel, what grows from it is chulin. Now, that needs some explanation. The explanation that it needs is that, number one, tevel means that you have to separate trumas and ma'aser from it. If what grows from it afterwards is chulin, you still have to separate trumas and ma'aser from it. It's not exempt. It's if we consider it, we don't consider it an extension of the tevel, fine, but it's regular grain. If it's regular grain, it's tevel on its own right. So when we say that it's chulin, which means we're trying to say it doesn't take on a characteristic of the tevel it came from, and that would be referring to a halacha that we mentioned previously, which is that if you have tevel, you have grain that was untied to trumas, ma'aser, or all of them have not yet been taken from it. So the halacha is they're allowed to snack on it. Achilas aroy, an informal eating, you're allowed to have from it. You can snack on it. You can't make a meal out of it, though. Now, if let's say the tevel, and when does it become to the point where you can't snack on it? Once it's fully processed. And every grain has its own stage when it's considered fully processed. But once it's fully processed, you cannot eat from it, even a snack. So the Mishnah's point here like tevel is, if let's say the tevel that you planted was tevel that was fully processed, which means you can't snack on it. And then you planted it, which you weren't allowed to. But once you do, we say that which grows does not take on the characteristic of the mother plant. What grows now is chulin. Is it tevel? Yes, it's tevel, but you can snack on it because you haven't processed it. The fact that it grew from processed tevel doesn't extend over to the growth, and that's what it means. That which grows from tevel is going to be chulin. The reason why the sages did not say that which grows from the tevel is tevel is because since when looking at tevel, the majority of tevel is really chulin. Tevel means that I have within it what has to be separated. And because of that, the whole thing becomes forbidden. But essentially, the rest of it is chulin. It's not meant, the whole thing is not meant to be given away. Part of it is meant to be chulin. It's still forbidden now because of what's still in there, what hasn't been separated from there. And therefore, being that essentially the majority of this tevel is chulin, it's regular grain that carries no stipulations to it. Therefore, the Chachamim did not put here their decree that which grows from forbidden is going to be forbidden. So that's the first case. The next case is ma'aser rishon. Ma'aser rishon means you separate a ma'aser rishon to give to the Levi. But as we know, there's trumas ma'aser in here. The Levi has to take ma'aser from his ma'aser. So right now you have this Meiser Rishon is Tevel. It's Tevel because of the fact that it has Trumas Meiser in it. Nonetheless, and you're not allowed to plant it because it's Tevel. If you did plant it, what grows from it is Chulin, which means that which grows from it, it's the same idea as before. What grows from it is regular Chulin. Right. It's the same thing as before. Although it's Tevel, and it could have already been fully processed. It probably was already fully processed if it's already at this stage. Nonetheless, what grows from it is going to be regular Chulin, and until it's processed, you can snack from it. So this is just another example of Chulin, of Tevel, that we say if you plant it or grows from it is permissible, and it follows the same reasoning as before. Since the majority of this Meiser Rishon is not Truma, therefore they do not extend that decree here of what grows from Truma is Truma. The next case is Svichei Shvius. Svichei Shvius means aftergrowth of the Shemitah year. So let me read to you here from the Yad Avram. Planting is forbidden during the year of Shemitah. Strictly speaking, aftergrowths, which means plants that grow up on their own from seeds that fell during the previous year's harvest. You didn't plant it. It grew on its own from seeds that fell from the harvest from the sixth year. Are permitted for consumption during Shemitah. According to the Torah law, they are permissible. They do not have the sanctity of the Shemitah fruit. What grows during Shemitah typically has a certain, we say, under certain circumstances, has the sanctity of Shemitah to it. Something planted during Shemitah has a sanctity of Shemitah to it. And actually even more than that, it's right. If you plant, I don't remember exactly halacha. If you plant Shemitah, according to Torah law, is it forbidden? I'm not sure. But the point is that according to the actual Torah law, these aftergrowths are completely permissible. Nothing wrong with that. However, the rabbis were concerned that if such produce were permitted, a person might plant illegally during the Shemitah year itself and then claim that the crop had grown up on its own. To prevent this, the rabbis prohibited produce that grows during Shemitah, even if it grows on its own. These are known as sfichim, aftergrowth of the Shemitah year. Okay, so that's what we're talking about. You're starting off with these sfichim. These sfichim are forbidden. You're not allowed to eat them. You're not allowed to eat them. We have other situations where you can eat Shemitah produce, but it has a sanctity of Shemitah. These things are forbidden. You're not allowed to eat them. Right. They're prohibited from eating them. You took them now and you planted them. The sages did not say that which grows from it is going to be forbidden, just like the original plant itself. Which means here the Rabbanan, the sages did not, again, enact their enactment of what grows from forbidden is forbidden. Why is that? And the answer is because this whole case of having svichim is considered something not very common. It only comes once every 7 years. And since it only comes once every 7 years, others say that the whole case of having svichim is a very uncommon thing, and therefore something that's uncommon, the Rabbanan did not make enactments upon. That's a general rule. Okay, that's the example of svichei shvius, aftergrowth of Shemitah year. Utruma chutz la'aretz, the truma of outside of Eretz Yisrael. As we mentioned before, there was a rabbinic enactment. The Truma and Meiser has to be separated from grains that come from the lands of Egypt, Babylonia, Ammon, and Moab. Okay? Now, here again we're saying that if you take that kind of Truma and you plant it, it will not be considered Truma. It's going to be regular Chulin. Why? Grew from Truma. And it's true, it's only rabbinic Truma, but that doesn't make a difference regarding this. And the answer is because here again we apply that it's considered uncommon. Having this kind of truma is uncommon. Now that needs explanation. If you're living in Babylonia, Egypt, Moab, or Ammon, they're not uncommon. But the point is, in Eretz Yisrael, in Israel, it's uncommon. And what the Mishna is saying is that this whole enactment, that what grows from truma is truma, only applies in Eretz Yisrael. And therefore, it would only have applied if the grain from Ammon and Moab was planted in Eretz Yisrael. Then we would say, oh, we have an enactment that was only enacted for Eretz Yisrael, that what grows from truma is truma. Now the Mishnah says, being that grain in Eretz Yisrael, grain from outside of Israel, truma out from outside of Israel, to be in Israel is uncommon. Therefore, the Chacham did not put their enactment of what grows from Truma is Truma on this kind of Truma. Next, Meduma is something we should be very familiar with. We had lots of discussions about it. If you have chulin grain and Truma fell into it, and you don't have 100 times more of the chulin grain against the Truma, we have a mixture of Truma and chulin, it's forbidden. What if you now plant that? You're not supposed to plant that. What if you did go ahead and plant it? The Mishnah says it is chulin. It's not considered meduma. It doesn't take on the status of a mixture of chulin and truma where the truma wasn't nullified. And here again, the reason why they did not include this in the decree of what grows from truma is truma, even though it's forbidden because of truma, is because, again, the majority of what I have here, it may not be enough to nullify it. The majority of what I have here is real chulin, and therefore they did not put their enactment on that. Then you have the case of bikurim. Okay, the first fruits to ripen from each of the 7 species of the land of Israel listed by the Torah, which are wheat, barley, grapes, figs, pomegranates, olives, and dates, must be brought by the farmer to the Beis HaMikdash in Yerushalayim. These fruits, known as bikurim, possess truma sanctity. Okay, they're first fruits from the 7 species. You have to take some of it. You have to designate it as bikurim. You have to bring it to Yerushalayim. It's eaten by the Kohen as the status of truma. Now, the Mishnah is teaching us that if bikurim were planted, that although truma that's planted has status of truma, bikurim that are planted do not have the status of bikurim. And the reason why they did not include in their decree is because we consider bikurim to be not as common as regular truma. Regular truma applies to all types of crops. Bikurim only applies to 7 species. Having such a case of bikurim being planted isn't that common because bikurim isn't considered as common as regular truma, and therefore we say that the Rabbanan did not put their enactment of what grows from truma as truma here. What the Yad Ram exam from the Yerushalmi, that when we say that what grows from bikurim is permitted, is only bikurim that's planted outside of Yerushalayim, meaning if before you brought it to Yerushalayim it was planted, then we say what's planted is not bikurim. But if we're talking about being planted after him to Yerushalayim, it was planted in Yerushalayim, then what grows from it does have the status of bikurim. So in all these cases, we say giduleya and chulin. What grows from them is chulin. They are just considered regular crops, and they follow the laws of regular crops. Eventually, you have to separate trumas and maasros from them. Until you do so, before the process, you can snack from it. When it's a process, you can't snack from it. It's devil. The final case of the Mishnah is Gedule Hektish Umaiser Sheni. That which grows from Hektish or Maiser Sheni. That means you had grain that was sanctified. It was sanctified to be the property of the Beis HaMikdash, which what you would do with that is you'd redeem it onto money, give the money to the Beis HaMikdash. But right now, while it's sanctified, before you redeem it, the halacha is that you may not plant it, you may not eat it, you may not plant it. Maiser Sheni is, as we mentioned before, it's the second tithing that's done after you give a tithing to the Levi. 4 out of the 6 years of the Shemitah cycle. The second Meiser is Meiser Sheni. You can eat it only in Yerushalayim unless you redeem it onto money, and then the money has to be spent in Yerushalayim. So we're saying here like this: if you planted produce that was either Hektish or Meiser Sheni, then we say that what is now generated from these plantings do not take on their status, which means that in order to be able to eat the what grew from the Hektish, what grew from the Meiser Sheni, you don't have to redeem it first. You can partake from it even without redeeming it. So that's what means it's chulin. It's chulin. You don't treat it exactly like what it grew from, and that means you don't need to redeem it in order to benefit from it. Nonetheless, the sages did enact that you have to redeem it. That's what the Mishnah concludes. When it says, let's read it again. Gedule hektish ma'aser sheni chulin. What grows from hektish ma'aser sheni is chulin. Upaida oisem is manzarim, and you redeem them according to what their price was at the time of their seed. Okay, that means that it's true. You want to eat it, you can eat it now before redeeming it, but the sages obligated you to redeem it. They're obligated to do redemption on this. Now, what does that mean? Do I have to redeem the amount of the entire new growth? And the answer is no. You only have to redeem in the new growth according to how much you had originally. So if, let's say, you planted a sa'ah of Meiser Sheni or a hektish, and it yielded 10 sa'ah, then that whole new crop only has to be redeemed for the price of the original amount of 1 sa'ah. Okay? That's what it means. You redeem it according to the time of their planting. So in essence, what grows is chulin. You can eat it as soon as you want, but you still have an obligation to redeem it based on the value of the original amount that was planted. And here too, the Rishalmi points out that the case of Meiser Sheni, as with Bikurim, Rishalmi distinguishes between Meiser Sheni that was planted in Yerushalayim, whose yield is sanctified, and Meiser Sheni that was planted outside Yerushalayim, whose yield is chulin. Again, the same way by the Bikurim, there was a difference that once it got into Yerushalayim, that it's considered like the Bikurim, so to the Meiser Sheni, which again, its place is meant to be Yerushalayim, and once it's Yerushalayim, it can't leave Yerushalayim. There we say if it was planted in Yerushalayim, it has the status of Meiser Sheni, which means you cannot partake until you redeem it. If you planted it outside of Yerushalayim, then you can partake from it even before you redeem it. But as the Mishnah says, the sages still instituted that you have to actually redeem it. Prohibition against shaving the temples of one's head, and that is referring to shaving with a razor. Shenema, as it states, you shall not round off the temples of your head, meaning to cut off the area around your temples. Therefore, one who shaves both his temples, even at one time, it's not two separate acts, just kind of one act of shaving, he knocks them both off. He receives 2 lashes. Each temple is a prohibition on itself. Whether he just cut off the temples, whether he shaved his entire head around that area, like one, nonetheless, you are going to get 2 sets of lashes. The dafka ish hamegaleach loike. Only the person who is doing the shaving gets the lashes, but because he's doing an act. But when getting shaved doesn't get lashes, unless he somehow or another helped him do it. To use a scissor like a razor is also forbidden to do. A woman does not have this prohibition, but she cannot do it to a man. She can't even do it to a minor. It applies in all places at all times. Have a wonderful day, a wonderful week. All the best.